Welcome back. I'm very excited to be reading. We have a great story today. This is a story that I heard a long time ago. It's a story that you may have heard of. It's a story that's been around for a while, and I hope you'll enjoy it as much as I do. This is the story of Rapunzel. There was once a man and a woman who had for a long time wished for a child. These people had a little window at the back of their house from which they could see a splendid garden which was full of the most beautiful flowers and herbs. However, it was surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared go into it because it belonged to an enchantress who had great power and was dreaded by all the world. One day the woman was standing by her window and looking down into the garden when she saw a garden that was growing some of the most beautiful vegetables, and it looked so fresh and green that she longed for it. Now the name of this vegetable was rampion, which is also called Rapunzel, and it was a delicious food. The woman was so sad she could not have any of that. She became sick and pale. Then her husband was alarmed and asked, "What is wrong with you, dear wife?" "Oh," she replied, "if I can't eat some of the rampion which is in the garden behind our house, I shall die." The man who loved her thought, "Instead of letting my wife die, I will bring her some of the rampion myself, and if I get in trouble, then so be it." At sunset, he climbed down over the wall into the garden of the enchantress. He quickly grabbed a handful of rampion and took it to his wife. She immediately made a salad out of it and ate it. Oh, it tasted so good to her, so very good, that the next day she longed for it even more than before. The husband knew that he would not get any rest unless he went back into the garden. So, in the gloom of the evening, he climbed down again. But when he had made it down the wall, he was terribly afraid, because he saw the enchantress standing before him. "How dare you," she said with an angry look, "sneak into my garden and steal my rampion like a thief? You shall suffer for it." "Wait," he answered. "Have mercy on me. I only did it out of necessity because my wife saw your rampion from our window, and she wanted it so bad that she would have died if she had not gotten her some to eat." Then the enchantress calmed down and said to him, "If that is the case, then I will allow you to take as much rampion as you want, but only under one condition. You must give me your firstborn child. It shall be treated well, and I will care for it like a mother." The man, in his fright, agreed to everything. And when the woman had her child, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the baby girl the name of Rapunzel, and took it away with her. Now, remember, the vegetable that the woman had her husband steal was called rampion, but it's also called Rapunzel. So that's what the enchantress named the little girl, named her Rapunzel. Rapunzel grew into the most beautiful child under the sun. When she was 12 years old, the enchantress locked her in a tower in a forest. And this tower had neither stairs, not doors either, but at the top was a little window. And when the enchantress wanted to go in, she stood beneath the window and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Rapunzel had magnificent long hair, as bright and fine as gold, and when she heard the enchantress call, she unfastened her braid, let her hair down the tower, and the enchantress climbed up by it. One day, a year or two later, the king's son rode through the forest and passed by the tower. Then the prince heard a song, which was so charming that he stopped and listened. It was Rapunzel singing, because she was all alone, and so passed the time by singing. The prince wanted to climb up to her, so he looked for the door of the tower, but he could not find one. Then he rode home. But the singing was so beautiful that he could not forget it, and so every day he went out into the forest and listened to it. Once when he was there standing behind a tree, he saw the enchantress approach, and he heard how she called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Then Rapunzel let down the braids of her hair, and the enchantress climbed up to her. "If that is how I am able to get up into the tower, then I will have to try it for myself," he said to himself. And so the next day, when it began to grow dark, he went to the tower and cried, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." Immediately, the hair fell down and the prince climbed up. At first, Rapunzel was terribly frightened when the prince climbed into her tower, because she had never seen a man before. But the prince began to talk to her like a friend, and he told her that his heart had been so moved by her singing that he could not stop thinking about it, and he had been forced to see her. Then Rapunzel stopped being afraid, and when the prince asked if she would marry him, she thought, "Well, he will love me more than the enchantress does." And so she agreed, and then Rapunzel said, "I will marry you, but I do not know how to get down. Each time you come back to see me, bring a piece of rope, and I will weave them together until it is long enough for me to climb down, and then we can ride away together." So they agreed that he would come to see her every evening, because the enchantress came in the morning. The enchantress had no idea about the prince, until one day Rapunzel said to her, "Tell me, enchantress, why are you so much harder to pull up the tower than the prince is?" "Ah, you wicked child!" cried the enchantress. "What do I hear you say? I thought I had hidden you away from the whole world, but you have deceived me." The enchantress was so angry with Rapunzel that she cut off her beautiful long hair and took her away to the desert, where she would have to live poor and lonely forever. That same day, however, the enchantress tied the braids of hair which she had cut off to the hook of the window, and at night when the prince came and called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair," she let the hair down. Then the king's son climbed up, but instead of finding his dearest Rapunzel, he found the enchantress, who glared angrily at him. "Aha!" she cried mockingly. "You thought you would find your beautiful Rapunzel, but she is no longer here. I got rid of her, and now I will get rid of you as well. Rapunzel is gone, and you will never see her again." The prince was beside himself with sadness, and in his grief he jumped down from the tower and went out into the forest alone. Then he wandered around the wilderness and ate nothing but roots and berries, and did nothing but cry and grieve about the loss of his precious Rapunzel. And he wandered the wilderness for years, until one day, while wandering through the desert, he came across the tiny house where Rapunzel had been living. He heard a voice, and it seemed so familiar to him that he went towards it. And when he approached, Rapunzel saw him and held on to him and wept. Then the prince led her to his kingdom, where he was joyfully welcomed, and they lived together in the kingdom, happily ever after. That was really nice. I love how that story ends so positively, doesn't it? There in the conclusion. Why don't we talk about our introduction and our conclusion? Our introduction, we start by being introduced to the man and the woman who wanted a child. And before we learn about Rapunzel, we learn about what the man and the woman did, how they stole out of the enchantress's garden. How the wife very much wanted to eat it, and how the husband did not want her to be sad, so he got it. And that introduction sets us up for the rest of the story. It explains to us how Rapunzel ended up in that tower with the enchantress. And then at the end of our story, at the conclusion, we're able to wrap it up by finding out how everything worked out well. They lived happily ever after. But it wasn't just out of nowhere. No. After everything that happened, the prince found Rapunzel again. And he knew he couldn't let her go. And the two of them wanted to be together forever. And they went back to his kingdom. And he was welcomed back. And they lived happily ever after. And that's a really, really nice conclusion for us to have, isn't it? Why don't we talk about some of our story elements? Let's talk about who the story's about. Well, the title of the story is Rapunzel. So we know that's our character, right? But there's other characters too. In our introduction, we find out about the man and the woman. We don't know their names, but they're characters. We find out about the enchantress, the evil enchantress. We kind of learn about her, how she has a garden behind a wall and she gets angry at people if they get over there. Later on, we hear about the prince. So we've got a lot of characters in this story. Let's talk about our setting. Let's talk about our where. We're not sure where this is. We're not sure what country it is or what city it's in. But we're able to get a picture of the setting, right? Because we imagine a little house, and behind that house is a walled-off garden. And then we hear about the forest that Rapunzel is taken into and the tower in the forest that she lives in. And then later on, when the evil enchantress sends her to the desert, we hear the desert is part of our story. And the prince wanders through the wilderness. That's a setting too, the wilderness. All through the forest and the desert. And then he makes it back to his kingdom, which we don't really hear much about, but we can count it as being part of where our story takes place. Let's talk about what happens. Let's talk about our sequence of events. Let's talk about how at the beginning, in our introduction, as we said, we find out about how Rapunzel comes to be in the tower. And after that, we hear more about how the story works, right? How the enchantress gets up, how she calls for Rapunzel. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. And how she climbs up. And then the prince is in the wilderness, is in the forest one day, and he doesn't see her. No, what? He hears, what does he hear? He hears Rapunzel, and she's singing. Yep. And he hears the singing, and so he finds his tower, but he can't find a way to get up. And so he says, well, I'm just going to come back, and I'm going to listen because this voice is so beautiful. And one day he watches, and the enchantress goes up, and so he sees how to do it. And when he does it, is Rapunzel excited to see him, or is she kind of terrified, kind of scared, kind of surprised, right? Because she had never seen a man before. And then their relationship moves a little quick, maybe, but there's nothing wrong with that. He asks her to marry him. She says yes, but they can't leave yet because how are they going to get down? Rapunzel can let him down with her hair, but she can't get down. So they come up with a plan that he will bring rope and they will make a way for her to get down. But what does she say to the enchantress one day? Do you remember? She says, how are you so hard to pull up when the prince is not hard to pull up? And that's when the enchantress finds out that she's been bringing somebody there. And she says, what? You have deceived me, right? You have tricked me. Well, I'm going to send you away forever. And so she cuts off her hair and she sends her to the desert to live alone forever. And when the prince comes back the next time, the enchantress knows that it's him. And she pulls him up, acting like she's Rapunzel. And when he gets there, she says, look, I've tricked you and now you're mine. And he tries to escape, and he jumps out of the tower, but he doesn't have Rapunzel anymore, and he's so sad that he just wanders through the forest, wanders through the wilderness, the woods. And someday, many months, many years later, he's walking along, and he comes to the desert, and in that desert, he hears something, right? And it's familiar to him. And when he goes to investigate, when he goes to find out who it is that's making this noise that he remembers so well, it's her, it's Rapunzel. And they're once again together. And they get married, and they go back to the prince's kingdom, and they live happily ever after. And that's a great story. Guys, let's talk about what kind of a story this is. Okay? We call this a fairy tale. Okay? And that's like a whole genre, right? That's a whole type of story. And a fairy tale, a lot of times it will start in a land far away. And a lot of times it'll end with how our story ended today. They lived happily ever after, right? And we're pretty familiar with these. There's a lot of stories out there. There's Cinderella and Snow White. Lots of times there's princesses and princes and evil sorcerers or enchantresses, right? So this story is not an informational text. This is a story text. And the type of text that this is would be called a fairy tale. And it's great. It's really, really good. I really like this story a lot. I hope you did too. And I can't wait until we're back reading again. And I hope in the meantime that you'll continue to read, because there's a lot to read and there's a lot to learn. So let's get to it.